They can't. They say they can't hear. How's that? How's that? Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty's loyal opposition have a constitutional duty. There they are. They have a constitutional duty to oppose the government and to seek to replace it. For this task, Mr. Speaker, they are handsomely paid. They are handsomely paid to the tune of almost £10 million of taxpayers' money. They are. That's what they're paid to do by the taxpayer. The leader of the opposition himself.
Point of order, Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, the microphone being placed so close to the Prime Minister means he can't hear that some of us over here are trying to intervene and have something that he and his backbenchers don't want, which is a debate. Because we all want to know whether he'll abide by the law that this Parliament has passed.
Yes, I say as much for the benefit of the watching public as for anybody else. That is an example of what I call the norm. Superficially a point of order, but entirely bogus. The Honourable Lady has made her own point in her own way with suitable alacrity, and it's on the record. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, may I thank you on your characteristically impartial judgments. The leader of the opposition. The leader of the opposition, there he sits. His party paid £10 million by the taxpayer. The leader of the opposition himself is entitled to over £140,000 of taxpayers' money. And yet today we have the extraordinary spectacle of the entire opposition collectively deciding to abrogate their most fundamental responsibility. Mr. Speaker, they have their job. They know what they should be doing. In this era of creative litigation, are there not grounds for legal challenge to compel them to do it? The leader of the opposition, honourable members can have their say in a minute. Mr. Speaker, I'm concluding my remarks. Sometimes he says we should leave the EU. Sometimes he says we should have another referendum. Sometimes he says we should negotiate a new deal. Sometimes he says he would accept whatever Brussels offers. Over the past few days, the Labour Party has said that it wants to delay Brexit, then negotiate a new deal, then have another referendum, then campaign against their own deal in that referendum. Perhaps their next policy will be to have a referendum on whether to have a referendum. Mr. Speaker, the leader of the opposition cannot lead. He cannot make a decision. He cannot work out whether he is for Brexit or against it, for a referendum or against it. The only options he likes are dither and delay. And I say to the opposition benches...
Order! I'm immensely grateful to the Prime Minister for his ready compliance with the procedures of the House. A point of order from Mr. David Linden, which I hope... Order, Mr. Swar, I don't require any assistance from you. You wouldn't have the foggiest idea where to start. What I'm seeking to establish is whether it is a point of order. When I've heard it, I will know. Until I have, I can't. Mr. David Linden.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, people observing tonight's proceedings will see that the annunciator shows that this is the second time that this House has been asked to approve this motion. Given that the Prime Minister is displaying somewhat of a contradiction by saying that he wants to ask this question of the House again, but not allow the people of Scotland an independence referendum, can you outline, Mr. Speaker, is this hypocrisy on the part of the Prime Minister?
Well, an ingenious effort, but let me just say to the Honourable Gentleman, this motion wouldn't be on the paper unless it was orderly. And I'm happy to conduct a seminar for the Honourable Gentleman's benefit outside the Chamber at a later date. It is at this time, given the context, orderly. He's made his own point, but it's a different one and it doesn't meet the needs of the case. The Prime Minister.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I say again to everybody on the opposition benches, if you really want to delay Brexit beyond October the 31st, which is what you seem to want to do, then vote for an election and let the people decide. Let the people decide. if they want to delay or not. And if you refuse to do that tonight, then I will go to Brussels. Our government will go to Brussels on October the 17th and negotiate our departure on the 31st of October. Hopefully with a deal, Mr. Speaker, but without one if necessary. I will not ask for another delay. I will not ask to delay.
Order. I apologise for having to interrupt the Prime Minister. Look, I will take these points of order, but I hope that they're genuine. Order. I hope that they're genuine. And the Prime Minister will then proceed with his speech. Point of order, Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, I am keen to have your guidance, given that we are supposed to be debating whether or not to have an early general election, whether the Prime Minister in that context is willing to share with the House whether or not he is willing to obey the law of the land.
Yes, that's a political observation, not a matter for procedural adjudication by the Chair. Dr. Sarah Wollaston, point of order.
Speaker, I have a point of order on behalf of the Liaison Committee, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister gave an undertaking that he would appear before the Liaison Committee this Wednesday at 3:30. The Liaison Committee have met today and we have written to the Prime Minister to ask whether he will still appear because...
Order. What I would say to the Honourable Lady, I recognise the sincerity and the strength of conviction. If she wishes to contribute to the debate in an orderly way, on her feet, in a speech, because she catches my eye, she can, but she shouldn't use the device of a bogus point of order. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I repeat my point.
Point of order, Geraint Davis.
The Prime Minister has just informed the House that on the 31st of October he'll go to Brussels and ensure that we leave with or without a deal in contravention of the motion that we've just passed, that we will obey the law in compliance with the law that's just been passed. Is that out of order?
I'd be immensely grateful if the honourable gentleman didn't feel it necessary to keep pointing at me. I know he feels strongly, but it isn't a point of order. I would say, in terms of the seamlessness of these proceedings, come on, let's have fair play. The Prime Minister is entitled to make a speech and be heard, as will the Leader of the Opposition be. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for allowing me to repeat my salient point that I will not ask for another delay. The people of this country have had enough of the delectable... The people of this country, Mr. Speaker, have had enough of the delectable disputation. Order! This is profoundly disorderly. Members mustn't be shouted down in the chamber. They mustn't be shouted down in the chamber. There are standards to be upheld, and they must be. The Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, it is plain from the turbulent reaction of the benches opposite that they simply want another delay. And I will not have that. The public have had enough of the delectable disputations of this House, and I must warn members that their behaviour in thwarting the will of the people is undermining respect for this House in the country. Mr. Speaker, if honourable members want another delay, the only proper way to do it is to ask permission from our masters, the people, from our masters, the voters, and I commend this motion to the House.
The question is that there shall be an early parliamentary general election. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only point of any importance that the Prime Minister has just included in his speech is his clear indication that he does not intend to follow the law that has just been passed that requires him to ask for an extension under certain circumstances. He also, Mr. Speaker, gave no answer to the two decisions this House has already made today concerning the publication of Yellowhammer documents and his own behaviour as Prime Minister in respect of laws agreed by this House. Because the Prime Minister has failingly seemed to grasp that opposition benches have actually been very clear that the House, Mr. Speaker, has expressed its will until the Act has been complied with and no deal has been taken off the table. No deal taken off the table. We will not vote to support the dissolution of this House and a general election. Now, I want an election, Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister pointed out. And the Conservative Party has very generously broadcast footage of me and my friends saying that we want an election. I don't retreat from that at all. We're eager for an election. But as keen as we are not prepared to risk inflicting the disaster of no deal on us, our communities, our jobs, our services, or indeed our rights. Mr. Speaker, no deal would not be a clean break. It would not mean just getting on with it. It would start a whole new period of confusion and delay. But this time, Mr. Speaker, set against a backdrop of rising unemployment, further deindustrialisation and of deepening poverty all across this country.
Order. I said a moment ago the Prime Minister should not be shouted down. Let me say to people who are shouting their heads off, it will be readily obvious to people observing our proceedings that's exactly what they're trying to do, including some extraordinarily stupid and noisy yelling from people secreting themselves behind the chair and thinking they're being clever. It's very low grade, it's very down market, it's very substandard, it's very boring, it's very predictable, and if the whips operated any sort of discipline, they would tell those people to try to get a life. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the point I was making was that it will be in a backdrop of unemployment increasing, deindustrialisation and deepening poverty within our society. Not very surprising that the government was so keen to hide the Yellowhammer documents, their own documents, which would demonstrate this to be the case. We have no faith that the government is seeking a deal in good faith. Indeed, the former Work and Pensions Secretary said in her resignation letter, I no longer believe leaving with a deal is the government's main objective. EU leaders have received no proposals. Government ministers have offered no explanation of the deal they are seeking, even if there is such a deal they're seeking, let alone any worked-out proposals presented to Parliament for scrutiny. No wonder they're so keen to prorogue so early to avoid any scrutiny of what they're doing. The only conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the only conclusion that can be reached, and it is backed up by all the leaked reports in the press, is that the government's pretensions to negotiate are nothing but a sham. The Prime Minister knows full well there is no mandate for no deal, no majority support for it in the country, and no majority support for it in this House. But he refuses to rule it out and refuses to set out any proposals to avoid it. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious issue. The Prime Minister is running away from scrutiny, running away from scrutiny with his blather and his shouting. Many people, Mr. Speaker, including the member for Hastings and Rye, are in conclusion that no deal is his only answer. but he has no mandate for that, and the last general election gave no mandate for no deal. The 2016 referendum gives no mandate for that. And, Mr. Speaker, the co-convener of the Vote Leave campaign said in March this year, and I quote, "We didn't vote to leave without a deal." He is now the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster. No deal is opposed. No deal is opposed by every business group, every industry group, every trade union, and has been opposed in votes in this House. I want to turf out this reckless government. This government that is driving up poverty, deepening inequality, scapegoating migrants, whipping up divisions and failing this country. A general election isn't something for the Prime Minister to play about with for propaganda points or even his very poor quality posts on social media. So perhaps the Prime Minister can, which could be the last time in this session of Parliament, answer some questions. Firstly,
Order, Mr. Philp. You're very loud and rancorous. Calm down, young man. You're getting very overexcited. Very, very overexcited. Very overexcited. Very overexcited. You can do a lot better than that. You must try to do so. Jeremy Corbyn. We're great.
Questions, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, to the Prime Minister, where are his proposals for renegotiations? Where are they? When were they published? What is their content? Secondly, since if he seeks a no deal, why doesn't he argue for it and seek the mandate for it that it so far does not possess? There is not a mandate for no deal. No, I'm not giving way. Thirdly, if as he claims, he is making progress.
Mr. Speaker, if the right honourable gentleman really wishes to avoid a no-deal Brexit, can he explain why he is unwilling to call an election, go to Brussels and seek to... Order!
Mr. Doherty Hughes, calm yourself. Is the Prime Minister Is the Prime Minister satisfied that he's made his intervention, or does he wish to complete it?
Complete it? Yes. Well, I'd like to know, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable gentleman wishes to avoid a no-deal Brexit, why does he not call an election, get a mandate, go to Brussels and negotiate a deal himself? What's his objection to that?
Because, Mr. Speaker, we're the responsible party in this room. We don't want to crash out with no deal. And there is also, Mr. Speaker, the issue, of course, of trust in a Prime Minister who is unable to answer any questions and is desperate to suspend Parliament to avoid any scrutiny. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, if he is making progress, as he told the House last week, why did the Taoiseach tell the Prime Minister only this morning he was yet to receive realistic, legally binding and workable plans? That was only this morning. The Prime Minister must be able to remember it. Perhaps he could explain why the Taoiseach felt the need to say that. I realise the desperation of the Tory party when all they can do is rearrange the mics on the Titanic. And finally, since Mr. Speaker, he didn't bother to turn up for the... Mr. Speaker, if I could just inform, with great respect, the members opposite, I've no intention of giving way to any of them, OK? And finally, Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister didn't bother to turn up for the previous debate, will he respect the law and implement the EU Withdrawal No. 6 Act if he has negotiated an agreement backed by this House on the 19th of October? This Parliament is not a platform for the Prime Minister's games. No, it's a chamber in which the elected representatives of the people hold the executive to account. That is what parliamentary democracy is about. The Prime Minister has been asked 4 simple questions. Mr. Speaker, I'm not giving way.
Order. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is talking up no deal to one wing of his party and talking up getting a deal to another wing of his party. The sad reality is he's not preparing adequately for the first and not negotiating at all for the other. On Sunday, Mr. Speaker, the 15th, it's UN International Day of Democracy, when the UN celebrates governments being held accountable to their national parliaments in a democracy. This government is only interested in shutting down Parliament to avoid any scrutiny. His obfuscations and evasions are being rumbled, both at home and abroad. And that is why he doesn't answer questions. And he's so keen to avoid any scrutiny. Tonight, he will be attempting to prorogue Parliament for one of the longest prorogations there have ever been. Shutting down Parliament, shutting down democracy, avoiding questions, taking this country over a cliff of a no-deal exit with all the damage that will do to many of the poorest and most vulnerable communities in our society, and all the damage it will do to trade and jobs, all because he wants to take this country into the direction of a trade deal solely with the USA rather than anybody else. Mr. Speaker, we are not walking into traps laid by this Prime Minister.